Hey everyone, this is a Tears of the Kingdom tips video providing you with ideal ways to approach the game and help you endure Link's new adventure in Hyrule. Although this video is meant for newcomers or casuals, those who are hardcore players feel free to look into this video because this is a game layered with so many mechanics and freedom to approach these levels. You may find something that may be informative to you. Please note that this video may have minor spoilers, but I'll do my best to not showcase any story, important lore of the game. Tip number 1. Always hit boxes, barrels for loot since arrows are essential. You could easily run out of arrows in this game. I personally enjoy using the bow and they are great to use in many scenarios. With that being said, I do run out of arrows quickly, and without purchasing arrows, my source of getting them is through breaking boxes or barrels. They also give fruits such as apples most of the time if it's not arrows, and this is just an efficient way to collect loot since you get arrows for your bow or apples to cook up for your health. Tip number 2. Always interact with people. People in this game give many hints, clues, or knowledge on what you can find or what you can do in this game. Although this is a simple tip to know, it is a common thing people can easily miss. Interacting with people will help give you an idea on what to do next or give reference to certain things, which is important since this is a huge game to take upon. Same thing goes for reading in-game text from diaries, journals, and such. Tip number 3. Know your materials. Each material has different effects and are used differently in certain scenarios. I highly suggest that you try to experiment with some materials because you never know if they could be good in combat or be a useful item to consume. If you feel a bit hesitant on using some material, the game gives a brief description on what they are used for. Some of it is vague, but doesn't directly tell you how to use them, but from my experience, a lot of material that I used, I always assume that is just used for elixirs. They can be used decently for fusing it with weapons. It's always great to fuse because for fusing weapons, especially during early game, weapons you find don't do big damage, so fusing them with other materials or even with other weapons help give that boost in strength. Now this tip is sort of a follow-up to the previous one, but tip number 4 is always fuse. I can't stress it enough, even though it sounds repetitive. Always fuse, because one of the most useful mechanics to utilize, especially during early game, since you're able to obtain strong weapons easily, and that's just by creating them yourself. My best advice to give, especially if you are lacking on weapons, is to always fuse with certain objects that are within your environment, whether you see like a boulder, a tree trunk, whatever. Just always have that mindset of fusing your weapons with anything. Or you could take out material from your inventory and fuse it with that. Be experimental with this feature because you would never know what type of weapon combination you can manage to create. And I also want to put this little side note. When you also encounter bosses in this game, after defeating them, they drop tons of loot. They also drop a certain material that you can't pick up and put in your inventory. This is an indicator, a sign to fuse that material with any of your weapons that are in your inventory, because you wouldn't be doing anything else with that certain material that's just laying on the floor since you're not able to pick it up and such. So always fuse the boss material with your weapon. You have no idea how much they really suit up your weapons with its damage. And maybe sometimes you could fuse it with a shield. I haven't really did big combinations with the shield yet. I still need to be creative and learn a bit more with how I combine with the shield, but for weapons, it is a essential thing because I just believe it's just a missed opportunity on big damage if you don't fuse your weapon with the boss material. Tip number 5. Cook. Cooking is the main thing you want to do in this game since meals are essential for exploration and combat. With cooking, not only you find ingredients that make a whole meal that can fully heal you, you could create meals that give heals that have buffs to them. Buffs are things such as cold resistance to survive the cold weather when in a snow biome. There are buffs with movement speed, making you run faster or just move faster in general, and there are many more in this game to see. In order to have these buffs in your meals, there are ingredients, which are your materials that have descriptions in them. They are clear on what they do in terms of cooking, so feel free to add them in the bowl as you cook. Keep note that putting multiple ingredients that have different abilities or buffs will not stack or mix in together. It will most likely come out as a regular meal with no buffs at all. So make sure you're always putting the ingredient with the certain buff you want and put other ingredients that have no other skills. Meat is an example of an ingredient that has no buffs when being cooked. There's a new feature in Tears of the Kingdom, which is looking into recipes. If you want to create something specific, the game shows what you have previously created. Simply go to the material menu and press on the item, and there's an option to look into the recipes. It will show all the meals that you have cooked with that certain material. When you receive new meals or food from people, it will still show the recipe on how to cook it. Make use of this feature, especially if you like a particular dish that has certain buffs on it. Tip number 6. Make tools such as farming weapons and battle weapons. In Tears of the Kingdom, there's a lot of material gathering when you explore. It is ideal to create a weapon or find one that is able to help you gather materials. There is a lot of important ore in this game to get, so it would be useful to create a hammer-like weapon to farm many of the ore. You can also create an axe to chop down many trees to collect wood and gather apples faster. Also, I farm many trees to collect wood and sell them since they are a quick and easy method to get some rupees. Variety is the key with your weapons, and it is also important to have weapons with different elements on them, since you could utilize them in exploration or in combat. Tip number 7, understand Link's movement and mobility. Link now has some movement and mobility options in the game. We can start out a bit simple and talk about how gliding is still one of the core mobility and movement options. Gliding is important to utilize since it could help you get to places much easily and can help you avoid fall damage. Gliding is used much better if you were to combine it with gliding from higher ground or use sky towers to put you into greater heights to glide across different areas of the map. An alternative way to have more mobility is creating mobility. With the new arm abilities, Ultra Hand could help you create transportation with Zonai Tech, and yes, if you want to find Zonai Tech, you would need to find them around your environment or gather them from capsule machines, which are found in certain locations. Usually they are up in the sky. You also don't need to create a sophisticated vehicle. It could be a very simple vehicle that could take you places easily. May take some creative thought and trials to make it happen, but it is worth in the long run, especially if you have obtained one of the last armor abilities for Link, which is Auto Build. Without giving spoilers, Auto Build is obtained underground. You don't need to find a questline for this, but if you want to do a questline to have a sense on where to go, talk to Joshua at Lookout Landing. Auto Build helps you save all the builds that you create and can also make you spawn your builds by using your Zonite. The trade-off to this mechanic is that depending on how your build is, it may take a lot of Zonite to spawn your creation. I recommend creating minimum builds that use less Zonite, so lesser the better for transportation if you want to spawn your builds from thin air. An honorable mention in this section is using your Ultra Hand and Recall abilities together, because with manipulating time you can make objects into platforms that could take you places. More so, to have height so you won't waste any stamina by climbing, or reach impossible areas that Link can't go to. Another method, instead of using a glider, when on high ground you could simply just use the Wing Zonai device to go through the map much easily, and you don't have to waste stamina by gliding across the areas. Also, you could steer the wing device without using the steering stick. You could just use Link's body as a way to move the wing. Whatever Link's whole body is facing, the whole wing will move with him. It is not as snappy to control compared to the steering stick, but if you want to conserve battery, or if you don't have much battery, this is an alternative solution to traverse through the map. Let's move on and talk about Link's movement. There are some options to know of when in combat or traversing through the maps. When in combat, pressing ZL locks into the enemy. When locking on, you are able to strafe left and right. When pressing the jump button while strafing, you are able to hop left and right as well. When moving backwards and pressing the jump button, Link does a backflip. These movement mechanics are useful when in combat to dodge attacks. When utilized correctly, doing a perfect dodge, whether you are side hopping or doing a backflip, when dodging an enemy attack, as soon as the enemy is about to hit you, a counter mechanic kicks in called Flurry Rush. It gives you a prompt to keep hitting Y, which is your melee button, to do wild slashes of combos to an enemy. The downside to this mechanic is that it shreds your weapon's durability very quickly, so be careful on what you use when initiating this mechanic. A little side note to the Flurry Rush is that you're able to change your weapons as soon as you do a Flurry Rush, so feel free to do that if you don't want a certain weapon to break immediately. Even without doing Flurry Rush counters, using Link's movement options is an important mechanic to practice because you'll still be able to dodge many attacks. You can even do these dodges while not locking on and just quickly input the same buttons. It is a bit clunky to use when not locking onto an enemy, but I thought it was worth noting. Practicing these moves again will help a ton, especially against newer enemies you'll encounter, and it is better to keep moving rather than being a bit stagnant while on the ground. That's how enemies get you easily if you don't move a lot in this game. The next movement option is shield surfing or shield skating. With shield surfing, when pressing ZL, make sure you see Link put up his shield as you do your input of ZL. Press your jump button, then A to execute this, and Link will casually surf on his shield. This helps with getting to places faster. It is most effective when surfing downhill or a slope. You could even grind on a rail with the shield. Another way of using this for Link is to have a long jump. The animation when initiating the shield surfing lunges Link forward. This more so utilizes the animations to your advantage. I even see people using this method in combat as they are using it as a dodge. It's also important to note that this technique does put down the shield's durability. Now with shield skating, you would need to find a minecart to fuse on your shield. When that happens, your shield is now a skateboard when doing the shield surfing tech. Yes, your shield skateboard would break when consistently using this, but from what I hear, the durability isn't as bad, so I would recommend you to always have an extra slot for your shield skateboard as it's a tool for your transportation. Tip number 8. Fight with different weapons during combat. An example is that I would have a variety of weapons in my arsenal and each would play out differently for the style of combat on what Link would wield. For example, if I have elemental weapons, I would use ice to freeze my enemy and switch out to a blunt weapon to break the enemy into pieces. I don't constantly use the same weapon in a fight and would rather conserve the durability, especially if it is a strong weapon. You will definitely notice that many of your weapons don't break in the long run. Another thing is that many weapons that Link wields make him have different stances, movesets, and effects when used properly. Typically, two-handed weapons tend to be slow but can create much stun, stagger to enemies, or even send them flying, creating an opportunity for your next move or give spacing. A one-handed weapon tends to not pack a lot of damage, but has speed when swinging the weapon. And also, if you have a shield that is present, you would be able to carry it with the one-handed weapon and be able to guard yourself, do parries when locking on. The last type of weapon is the spear. Although they are technically two-handed weapons, they don't operate the same as the other two-handed weapon. Spears operate similarly as a one-handed weapon with their speed, but do a bit more damage. The main thing you want to use a spear is for its spacing. This helps a lot when in fights, especially if you have a hard time finding an opening to close into an enemy or need to have a bit more reach to attack an enemy from a distance. I always tend to have one when they are available around me and is my personal favorite in the game. Tip number 9. Understand enemies' weaknesses or vulnerabilities. This will help you make you go through fights much quicker. An example is on being aware to do critical hits with the arrow by hitting them on the head does a lot of damage or can possibly one-shot them. Even knowing things like how you're able to one-shot common flying enemies with the bow and arrow, using flashes to stun many enemies in the room or if they are hanging on the ceiling, using a flash will make them drop and make them vulnerable to you. Having knowledge with their elemental weaknesses, such as how fire can easily take out ice type enemies or how you could easily take out armor enemies with a blunt weapon. There are many ways to approach its combat, whether you are using melee weapons or not. It's why I encourage everyone to experiment constantly with material fusing, with melee weapons and bows, and even using your arm abilities can help in combat. Throwing certain materials can be a difference as well within your combat since you are preserving your weapon's durability or arrows. Tip number 10. Utilize the slow motion feature with the bow. It is one of the most useful features in the game, especially if you have a hard time aiming. As long as Link has some airtime, you would be able to use this mechanic simply by aiming your bow as Link is in the air. You don't need to be in really high places to execute this properly. This is a thing that can happen easily. An example is that if you jump from your horse or vehicle, you could use this mechanic efficiently. Jumping off a platform that isn't so far off from the ground can enable the mechanic too. The trade-off of this mechanic is that while in slow motion and shooting with the bow, it uses a lot of stamina. So be cautious when using this, especially if you are doing this off high places. You would still want some stamina left to use your glider to land safely. Tip number 11. Know your elements and how they react. This can help in and out of combat. An example I could give is that if I use a water jelly and splash it on an enemy, the enemy would be soaked up. And if you do a follow-up attack with an arrow fused with any material that involves the shocked effect, it creates a big shock AoE. And this method is useful if all enemies are gathered up together. If you would use this out of combat, it is very useful for gathering fish. You could create a big shock AoE if you shoot an arrow that has the shock element into the body of water where fish are in. It would be able to get nearly all the fish and you would simply collect without any sort of hassle. Another example is that if you're near some tall grass and you expose it to fire, it would create a gust of wind that will make you have a small vertical boost in the air. The last example I could give is that having a fire weapon is one of the most useful things to have while you are in the snow biome because not only they melt ice, having it equipped creates much more heat for Link's body temperature. It helps you if you don't want to use any cold resistant buffs or don't have the option to use a cold resistant buff. Same concept goes when you're in the hot Gerudo Desert. Having an ice weapon will help Link endure the heat. There are plenty of other elemental reactions that I have not mentioned, so it's important to keep in mind that you could be creative with how things react to each other when you're in your own adventure. Tip number 12. Last but not least, always use shrines as a lesson of the game. Shrines are scattered all over Hyrule and also within the sky. These shrines are not only challenges but are lessons to its mechanics. So be observant each time you visit a shrine and solve it. Use that knowledge, apply it to your guys' adventure because there's just so many things throughout Hyrule to really see, experience, and there's so many puzzles in this game to discover, especially, and that's counting the shrines as well. So again, use the shrines as your lessons to the game. Always constantly do them so you are constantly learning about the game. It's a much efficient and healthy way to play the game overall. It's fun, you learn, and you just keep progressing. So always do a shrine whenever you see it and always pay attention to it. Don't just do it for the heck of it. Do it so you could also learn and also get a reward from it as well, because of the blessings you could get. Anyway, I hope this whole entire video helps. This was basically a guide video and I didn't expect the video to be this long, but I hope this tips video actually helped. I know I was able to like cover every single mechanic because there's just so much to learn about this game, and if I miss any crucial tips for beginners, comment down below. I would love your guys' help, or see if you guys have any different opinions or like just things how you guys approach the game. Since this game, there's just so many possibilities. The creative freedom you have in this game is insane. So share how you would approach the game. Would love to see your guys' comments, and it will also help out people checking out this video. Make sure not to spoil anything as well. If you are spoiling, I will remove the comment immediately. So be careful on that. Remember to drop a like. Any support to the channel or video matters a lot. Thank you for all the support from my previous Zelda video. I honestly didn't expect it to somewhat pop off, so thank you again so much, guys. And I'm not sure what other Zelda content I will be posting, but I also do post a variety of games. I'm into different sorts of games, so if you guys are interested in my channel, feel free to subscribe because I like to talk about many different games. But yeah, I'm still not sure what I should post for Zelda, but for the meantime, I hope this video again is useful, and you guys could always just come back and see the video. Anyway, peace off, have a good day, and have a great adventure in Hyrule. Peace.